Coming up on Network Africa, U.S. announces update to its non-immigrant visa policy for Nigeria, cutting duration and tightening conditions. 5 African leaders head to Washington for a surprise meeting with President Donald Trump. Plus, authorities in eastern Libya refuse entry to 3 European ministers and the EU Commissioner for Migration over alleged entry violations. Hello everyone, welcome to the program. I'm Joke Rogers here in Lagos, Nigeria. We begin today with a revised visa policy for Nigeria by the United States, saying effective immediately, most non-immigrant and non-diplomatic visas issued to Nigerian citizens will be single entry with a 3-month validity period. The policy came into effect on Tuesday, July 8. A statement from the U.S. mission in Nigeria says those U.S. non-immigrant visas issued prior to July 8, 2025 will retain their status and validity. We wish to underscore that, as is standard globally, visa reciprocity is a continuous process and is subject to review and change at any time, such as increasing or decreasing permitted entries and duration of validity. You can view the latest information on visa reciprocity schedules for all countries at the travel.state.gov. The State Department says visa policies remain subject to ongoing review and may change depending on evolving diplomatic, security, and immigration benchmarks. The U.S. government says it's working closely with Nigerian authorities to ensure the country meets key international standards. Foreign Affairs commentator Curtis Adwa joins us now for more on this. Curtis, great to see you today.
Thanks, Joke. How are you?
I'm great. So what do you make of the timing of this announcement by the U.S. State Department?
Well, it has to do with our president showing up at the BRICS meeting in Brazil. President Trump has been very consistent. He has been consistent about not wanting other countries to team up with BRICS against the interests of the United States. He sees any attempt to join BRICS or to identify with the ideas of BRICS as an attack on the U.S. And so this is him fighting back against President Tinubu's participation at the BRICS meeting.
Right, but part of the statement saying the reason for this latest move is because of reciprocity. So what is Nigeria doing that, the United States says it's paying back, apart from the president going for the BRICS meeting in Rio?
Yes, but so if there were certain happenings before now, why did they pull the trigger until the president showed up at the BRICS meeting? The fact is that Nigeria and the United States have had a very cordial relationship as far as issuance of visa for Americans and for Nigerians is concerned. Don't forget that until Muhammadu Buhari became president and following negotiations between his government and that of Trump, it was 2 years maximum that Nigerians were being given, just like the United States citizens were also getting 2 years from Nigeria, until the parties discussed and came to the conclusion that their citizens need longer visa duration. And that was signed, and that's why we started doing it. But so for this to be imposed just all of a sudden, it couldn't have been the issue of reciprocity. I mean, it couldn't have been just based on the fact that we did not reciprocate their efforts well. I think it's basically Trump telling the world that it's American first. He believes in American leadership, but not based on collaboration, based on America dictating to other nations what they need to do. He forgets that irrespective of how powerful a country is, in international politics, there's equality of nations. So this is the problem. I think this is what is at play here.
Right, and you don't think even for a moment that it could have anything to do with the Trump administration's plans, to cut immigration to the United States in its entirety, and Nigeria is just caught in the crossfire of this?
Look, President Trump does not want immigration from Africa, legitimate or illegitimate. He said so. He said constantly that Africa is shithole countries. He preferred immigrants from Europe and even from South Africa, but they've got to be white South Africans. You saw how when the South African president, Ramaphosa, visited the White House, what he said to him was that these are Christians who have been persecuted in their countries, in their country and all that. So he put them on a fast track to get to the US in place and in front of those who have been on the queue. It's simple. He does not want immigrants from Africa in the United States. We have been told that, they prefer legal immigration. But how do you get legal immigration when there is no immigration reform? And so it's all just been talks and rhetoric about immigration, but we can see it clearly that he's not keen on having immigrants coming from Africa into the United States. So it's also part of the game.
Right, and do you think that this should apply to all categories of non-immigrant visas, including study, business, or pleasure?
So he's toyed with the idea in the past about including Nigeria in the list of countries that are not allowed to travel to the United States completely. And of course, they've got to find one reason or the other to justify that decision. He's also cut back at the number of admissions that universities in the United States can give to countries coming from countries in Africa. These are all policies that they have toyed with. Again, the basic thing is they don't want immigrants coming in from Africa, okay? His American first policy simply means that everything has got to be about America. They want America to export goods from America to other parts of the country, but they also don't want others to import into America. They keep toying with the idea of tariffs here and there tomorrow. In fact, even based on Nigeria's participation in BRICS, they also imposed additional 10% tariffs, on Nigeria. So we're going to see all these kind of policies come into play, go off and come on, depending on what Nigeria will do at any point in time. This is all about teleguiding Nigeria, wanting Nigeria to act in a particular manner, to suit them. If that doesn't happen, then ordinary citizens of this country have got to pay a price. But don't forget that even with the introduction of the new visa policy, diplomatic visas, visas for the president and for top government functionaries are not going to be affected. It is for ordinary Nigerians and business people who want to go to the United States that will not have to apply every 3 months, because once the visa is issued, it's for 3 months and just for an entry. After that, you have to apply for a new visa. Of course, it's going to be too hectic.
And how do you think the Nigerian government should react to this latest development?
Well, if I were in the government, I would think I would impose the same kind of measures on them. Because you see, no matter how powerful these countries are, no matter how powerful the United States is, Nigeria is a sovereign nation with its own rules and guidelines. And so if a country treats you this way, this was not even subject to negotiation. The US could have expressed its concern to Nigeria saying, we're not happy with what you have done and all that, and we think that we should engage and talk. But that didn't happen. They just imposed the new measures. So I think Nigeria should also reciprocate.
Right, foreign affairs commentator Curtis Adwa, I would like to leave it there. I'm sure this is a developing conversation that will be on for weeks, even months at that, until the government also says something about it. But thank you for your time on the program today.
Thanks for having me. Thank you.
In the meantime, 5 African leaders are expected in Washington this week for a somewhat surprise meeting following a late June announcement by the U.S. President Donald Trump that he would host the heads of state of Liberia, Senegal, Gabon, Mauritania, and Guinea-Bissau for a 3-day summit in the country. The meeting, aimed at highlighting U.S.-Africa collaboration, which includes trade, investment, and security, is scheduled to take place from July 9 through to 11. This marks the first major diplomatic outreach to Africa from Washington since President Trump returned to office following a tense one-on-one meeting with South African President Cyril Ramaphosa at the White House in May. The 5 invited countries are rich in natural resources, including oil and gas, gold, and rare earth minerals. Meanwhile, Nigeria's new opposition alliance, the African Democratic Congress, has condemned President Bola Tinubu for not being invited to the African summit at the White House. According to a statement by the party's publicity secretary, Bolaji Abdullahi, Nigeria's absence from the meeting constitutes a damning international indictment of the country's poor economic health and weak foreign policy under the Tinubu-led administration. He warns that the new BRICS tariff against Nigeria is further evidence of the country's declining global reputation, noting that just a few years ago, it will have been unthinkable for a meeting of this nature to take place without Nigeria. He adds that this shows how far the global standing of the country has declined under President Tinubu's administration. Staying in Nigeria, the Coordinating Minister of Health and Social Welfare, Professor Ali Pate, has announced the signing of a memorandum of understanding with the Brazilian Ministry of Health that will see Nigeria getting some commodities such as vaccines. The minister said this took place on the sidelines of the ongoing meeting of the Global South and the emerging economies in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, the 17th meeting to take place. He added that the plan is to work towards transferring some of the technologies for production so that over time manufacturing can begin to take place in Nigeria.
We signed a memorandum of understanding between the Brazilian Ministry of Health on the federal government of Brazil and the Federal Ministry of Health and Social Welfare in the federal government of Nigeria. And that MOU commits us to work together along those dimensions, including exploring government-to-government arrangements to secure commodities like vaccines, which Brazil is able to produce and has been producing for decades, that are safe, that are efficacious, that are well-regulated, with a view to transferring those technologies over time for the manufacturing to take place in Nigeria. Certain pharmaceuticals for HIV, TB, and other drugs that we use, there is a private company in Brazil that is already in discussions through its partner to establish a manufacturing plant in Nigeria. Now, the relationship between the two governments would enable those trade relations to accelerate. So the MOU provides us a structured mechanism for engaging and building the partnership between the two countries. Of course, it is not limited to health broadly, the kinds of areas that Brazil and Nigeria are working together. But my task here is to focus on what we can do more on health in line with the leadership of His Excellency President Bola Ahmed Tinubu, because the leadership of the president has restored respect in the global scene for Nigeria.
Welcome back. We're in South Africa now, where the government has rejected an announcement by the U.S. government to impose a 30% tariff on South African goods. But some business leaders say the African Continental Free Trade Area could serve as a critical buffer against mounting global trade shocks. They were reacting to the news at a meeting in Johannesburg, stressing the need for African businesses to adapt swiftly in the face of escalating geopolitical tensions and volatile trade dynamics. Our South Africa correspondent, Innocent Samusa, reports.
Business leaders, policy makers, and business executives have converged here in Johannesburg, South Africa, to discuss the impact of ongoing geopolitical uncertainty on South African industries and cooperation. Now, we do know that those behind this gathering says it aims to identify the sectors most at risk and unpack the underlying reasons behind their vulnerability. Jack Wolferys, Director and Sector Head for Industrials, Trade and Manufacturing at Clive Decker Hofmeyr, says Africa must strategically position itself to navigate rising geopolitical tensions and global trade wars.
From an African perspective, we need to really look at where we're going. So we have the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, and I think what needs to happen with the trade war, it's not just affecting South Africa, it's affecting a number of African countries also. But we need to actually be more intentional. So we have this agreement, but we're not intentional enough, I think, from a political perspective to ensure that we actually have the right domestic policies in place. We have the overarching AfCFTA to encourage and ensure that trade actually happens on a continental level, because that's potentially the solution.
Delegate says government policy can play a crucial role in supporting industries during times of geopolitical uncertainty.
I think it's incredibly important, but I think that more important is for companies to realize what is within their realm of control right now. I think it's something called active acceptance. You accept that right now the geopolitical landscape is a little bit of a roller coaster ride, and what is within my control as a company to kind of navigate this crazy landscape that I'm facing right at the moment. So yes, government policy, incredibly important.
I think it's extremely important, and particularly from a foreign direct investment perspective. So making Africa really a place that investors want to allocate their capital. We're seeing investors around the world a little bit hesitant now around the US, for example. That capital has to go somewhere. So I actually think it's an opportunity for African governments to say, hey, this is a really good place to invest by making it business friendly.
As Africa faces mounting global pressures, business leaders say collaboration between government and the private sector will be key to building economic resilience. From Johannesburg, South Africa, Innocent Samosa, Channels Television News.
And same with the issues of the U.S. tariffs. We're in Lesotho now, where around 40,000 jobs are on the line if the African Growth and Opportunity Act, AGOA, is not renewed by the end of September. Earlier this year, the U.S. President Donald Trump cut aid and hit Lesotho with 50% tariffs. Lesotho exports around 75% of its textiles to the United States, but with the high tariffs, it's difficult for the country's economy to cope. Recently, the country declared a national state of disaster for 2 years over unemployment and job losses facing the country. And back in South Africa, as part of efforts to eliminate crime from correctional centers, the country's Correctional Services Commissioner, Magoti Tobagali, has led a raid at the Gosi Mampuru prison. Sistel meth, cell phones, and other contraband items are among things that were discovered. They allege that a criminal associate of Minister of Police Senzo Mchunu was also found with a cell phone during the surprise raid. However, the Correctional Services Commissioner says action will have to be taken against prison wardens who are trading illicit goods. A Tunisian court has sentenced one of the country's most prominent opposition leaders to 14 years in prison, adding to a string of convictions that he received in other cases. Several other detained members of his party were sentenced to 12 years. The leader of Tunisia's Ennahda movement, Rachid Ghannouchi, was among those sentenced as part of a sweeping case in which politicians were charged with conspiring against state security. Mr. Ghannouchi's party rose to power after Tunisia became the first country in the region to oust a long-time dictator as part of the Arab Spring. He later served as Speaker of the country's assembly and is among the opposition figures who have faced prosecution since President Kais Saied took power 6 years ago. However, his defense team has denied the charges against him, saying the proceedings did not meet the standards of a fair trial. And in Kenya, President William Ruto has ordered the police to shoot protesters targeting the businesses in the legs, ensuring that they are incapacitated, however, not killed. A statement released by the president says anyone caught burning another person's business or property should be shot in the leg, hospitalized, and later taken to court. He says, don't kill them, but ensure their legs are broken. He further warns his political rivals against sponsoring and using violent protests and unlawful means to forcibly remove him from power. Kenya National Commission on Human Rights reports that in addition to the 31 deaths, more than 100 people have been injured and about 532 arrested in the protests which hit the capital Nairobi and other major cities, according to a state-run body. The United Nations and human rights groups have accused the police of using excessive force in the recent wave of anti-government protests, killing 31 people.
We are deeply troubled by the killings yesterday of at least 10 people, as well as looting and destruction of property in Kenya as police and other security forces responded to violent protests in the capital of Nairobi and at least 16 other counties. Lethal ammunition, rubber bullets, tear gas, and water cannons were used. It is very concerning that these latest incidents come barely 2 weeks after more than 15 protesters were reportedly killed and many more injured in Nairobi and in other parts of Kenya on the 25th of June. The UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, Volker Turk, renews his call for calm and restraint and full respect for the freedoms of expression, association, and peaceful assembly. It is essential that legitimate grievances at the root of these protests are addressed. We note that the police have announced an investigation into earlier incidents. The High Commissioner repeats his call for all reported killings and other alleged violations and abuses of international human rights law, including with respect to the use of force, to be promptly, thoroughly, independently, and transparently investigated. Those responsible must be held to account.
Elsewhere, authorities in Libya, eastern Libya, have refused entry to 3 European ministers and the EU Commissioner for Migration over alleged entry violations, apparently after they first stopped in Tripoli, the country's rival capital in the west. A statement from the Prime Minister of Eastern Libya, Osama Hamid, says that the interior ministers of Italy, Greece and Malta, along with EU Migration Commissioner Magnus Brunner, were declared persona non grata, denied entry shortly after arriving in Benghazi. A statement adds that the ministers had entered the country illegally and had failed to comply with Libyan diplomatic protocols. It further urges the delegations to engage with the Libyan government in accordance with the principle of reciprocity as outlined in international agreements, treaties, and diplomatic norms. The delegation had traveled to Libya to push for tougher migration controls, particularly targeting boats carrying migrants from Libyan shores. According to reports, the EU has spent years and millions of euros attempting to curb people smuggling operations that have flourished amid Libya's political instability and lawlessness, bringing hundreds of thousands of migrants to Europe. And just before we go, the historic leather tanneries in the city of Fez are a living testament to a centuries-old craft. The traditional techniques of tanning and dyeing have reflected the richness of Moroccan handcrafts and the authenticity of its culture, making Fez a recognized UNESCO World Heritage Site. The head of the Tanners Association and member of the Chamber of Traditional Industry in Fez, Abdul Nasser Amari, claims this profession is one of the oldest related to leather goods, adding that it's considered a part of traditional craftsmanship with a long history of nearly 900 years old, more than 9 centuries. The tannery in the city of Fez attracts tourists from all over the world each year to admire its vibrant colors and learn about the ancient craft that uses livestock hide. According to the official website of UNESCO, the city of Fez has legal protection at both the local and national level, aimed at preserving its cultural heritage and ensuring its inclusion on the World Heritage List. That's Network Africa. Thank you for watching. I'm Joke Rogers.